Hi, I'm Pastor Steve Talmage at Love of Christ Lutheran Church in Mesa, Arizona, and along with Pastor Nanette Christofferson, we provide introductions to two of the assigned Bible readings for the upcoming Sunday. We're going to take a look at the Gospel for Sunday, August 6, 2023. We're now into Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 to 21. Let's do context. Again, it's always good to read before and after a lesson, so you're not just kind of seeing one little reading and not knowing what maybe is leading into it or what follows after it. In this case, the context is chapter 13, which we spent the last 3 weeks on, is parables of Jesus along the Sea of Galilee, with a couple of times where he's in a house explaining the weeds and the wheat and the sower and the soils to the disciples. But we're in Galilee, we're up there. And now in chapter 14, we have a transition. We have a transition with going back to John the Baptist, Jesus' cousin, the one who baptized him in the Jordan River, that launched his public ministry after being tempted in the wilderness. And now we get the report to Jesus. We get the account of John the Baptist being killed by Herod, and then the word being brought to Jesus. So Matthew 14 verse 12 is kind of the link in to what happened. And you know, most of us know the story. John was speaking out against Herod's marriage, believing that he interfered in the marriage of his brother, and had an affair with his wife, or seduced her, or convinced her to leave his brother to become his wife. And here he is, though it's a kind of a political appointment as king of the Jews, he is not living the lifestyle that is honorable to God. And so John is calling him out on it, and expressing that he's not the character that we need in a king. And typical politician with a little power, he does what he does. He throws a party, and he asks his wife what she would like to have happen to John the Baptist, because obviously it's making her feel very uncomfortable. And so Herod's daughter dances for his guests, his cronies, his court. And after she dances and everyone's wooing and wowing, says, "What is it that I can give you for the way you dance for my party?" And under the influence of her mother, Herod's wife, she said, "I want John the Baptist's head on a platter." So John was already arrested, he's in jail, and he has his head chopped off. And it's paraded around at this party. So, verse 12 of our chapter 14. John's disciples came and took the body and buried it. So I have a picture here of them putting him in a crypt and, taking his head to join the body and then put him in a tomb. And then they went and told Jesus. So Matthew wants Jesus to know what happened to John. And it's kind of like closing the chapter of Jesus's, prophetic introduction as the one who prepared the wilderness for the way of Jesus. And now John's gone, and we got to move forward with the introduction of the kingdom of heaven revealed in and through Jesus. I think it's important for us to know that Jesus knows grief. What types of reactions have you felt when you discovered a loved one has died? Jesus knows those kinds of feelings. What type of reactions have you had when you know the death was a violent one? It's traumatic for us to get the news of someone we love has died, but when we know that they died a violent death, maybe in battle, maybe by assault from some stranger, maybe being shot, as we're so kind of numb to people being shot on a day-to-day basis around the country and in our own communities. What type of reactions does that grief generate? So don't think Jesus was immune from feeling what you and I feel, which leads to our lesson. Now when Jesus heard the news of John's death, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. Why do you think Jesus sought a deserted place by himself? Why do you think the crowds continued to pursue Jesus? We don't know if the crowds knew what news Jesus knew. But this going off into a deserted place by himself may be a grief response. We also are going to see some clear parallels, as we've said earlier in lessons on Matthew, of Jesus being compared to Moses, or being the new Moses, the deliverer, God's deliverer. And so he's going to a deserted place like Moses did to spend time with God. And the people, in the wilderness with Moses, they always wanted something from Moses. And Jesus is modeling the only way that he can do what he needs to do is to be by himself, but you're never by yourself anywhere because God's with us. And so clear his head, calm his heart, figure out what's next. But you know what the crowds want, don't you? Verse 14, when he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. He sees their brokenness. He sees their needs. He has compassion. He feels what they're feeling and wants to help relieve some of that suffering. So he cures their sick. And that seems to be the number one prayer concerns that we seem to have, is for people we love who are sick. Maybe afraid they're going to die, or we know that they're just hurting or weak or suffering. We believe in a God who knows and expresses compassion. So my question, when has caregiving gotten in the way of processing your grief? And I think for anyone who's dealt with somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or long-term chronic health issues, there's a grieving that goes all the way along before they die. But the reality is you got to take care of these people. And you don't have time to step away because there's a direct need right in front of you. 15 to 17, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, this is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves. Jesus said to them, they need not go away. You give them something to eat. They replied, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. First question is, what excuses do we offer that reflect we don't trust in God's provision? And again, this put Moses in the wilderness with the people. They are grumbling about what are we going to eat and what are we going to drink. It appeared there was nothing in the wilderness, but Moses said God will provide. 18 to 19, he said, bring them here to me. Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples. And the disciples gave them to the crowds. Where do we hear the words that I highlighted in this slide in our life together? Taking, looking up, blessing, breaking, giving. Where do we hear those words? On a regular basis in our life together. And then all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. What do you think Jesus is trying to teach his disciples or the crowds? Now, some way to explain this miracle is the people of God, as they listened to Jesus, the crowds listened to Jesus. They saw Jesus celebrating this fish and loaves, giving thanks to God, and then sharing it with his disciples, who then began to share it with others. They all broke out whatever food they had, and it was a huge community potluck. So everyone had enough. But I think it's important that we listen to what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. 12 baskets full, one for each disciple to carry. And those who ate were about 5,000 men besides women and children. How have you experienced God providing more than enough? Because that's what this story is really about. We're never going to outgive God. And as you and I learn to trust in God's abundance and God's provision, as we share generously, compassionately, there's always going to be enough, even when it looks like there isn't. Because we're connected and we confess faith in the God who created the universe and all that's within it. So think about how you've experienced God providing more than enough. God bless you as you go into this week of seeing God's provision, God's abundance, God's compassion. Take care.